Now we're looking at neutrons and action potentials. Now the first thing that we really have to look at here would be generally the structure of a neuron, right? So let's look at these structures. We have multiple structures here that we have to really talk about, starting with the soma, right? The cell body are also called the soma. I'll refer to it as a soma. Alright, so that's a soma, right? So we know that this is really the core section of a neuron, right? It stores all genetic information because you know that the nucleus, and obviously within the nucleus we have the nucleolus, right? That has the information, right? So it also provides energy, right, and drives different types of activities. So we know that mitochondria and the nucleus and different types of the typical cell material, right, or typically what you see in a cell, right, it would be found there in the soma, right? So yeah, it also protects. So it is enclosed by a membrane that both protects it and allows it to interact with immediate surroundings, right? So we have that there, the soma. It's really simple. Then here we have what we call the dendrites. So the dendrites stick out from the soma. So notice that these are the dendrites, right? Sticking out from the general soma, right? So these things, right, sometimes I refer to them as dendritic trees, right? So they look like tree-like structures branching out from the soma, right? So they're usually known as fibrous roots, right, that really branch out from the body, right? And they can have, and we have to note that neurons can have more than one set of dendrites, right, known as dendritic trees, right? So they can have more than one set of dendrites, right? So yeah, so the dendrites really connect information or collect information, right? It's like an antenna, right? They receive and they process signals from axons of other neutrons, right? So they really collect that information. And here now we have what we have here now, the axon. So here's the axon. So if we're supposed to draw the axon generally without anything on it, the axon would just be that area, right? So this long line that we see here would be the axon, right? So that long line there, right? So it's like a T-like structure, and it joins the cell body, right? And at a specialized junction called the axon hillock. So the axon hillock is around this structure here, right? So it joins there. Many axons, right, tend to be insulated with the myelin sheath. So we see the myelin sheath. So they have myelin sheaths there. So myelin sheaths are usually fatty in some way and they act as insulators. As we know that neurons really control or, well, send information through electrical impulses. So they have insulators here, right? And within, and we're going to be looking at really what the myelin sheath really does, right? So the myelin sheath tends to slow down signals and helps for that type of insulation there, right? So yeah, that's what it really does. It allows for electrical impulses to really be transmitted quickly and efficiently, right, along the nerve cells. So it allows it to go quickly, actually, right? So my bad for saying it slows down, right? So it actually allows that. So they're usually insulating layers found around these axons, right? And they help for the quick flow of current or the transmission through the axon, right? Within the myelin sheath now, we tend to have types of glial cells. So these are glial cells. Right, glial, right? So there tend to be types of glial cells, right? So the Schwann cells are a type of glial cell, as we can see here, the Schwann cell here. So it's a type of glial cells, as we said, right, that surrounds the neuron, right? So it keeps them alive right? And sometimes covering them with a myelin sheath, right? So they are usually the major type of glial cell that we'll see, right? And they play essential roles such as like in function, maintenance, regeneration of peripheral nerves. So they play that type of regenerative function, right? So we have that. Now between each of these, we tend to have these nodes here where there are no myelin sheath, right? So these nodes here are known as the node of ranvir, right? The node of ranvir. So it tends to speed up the propagation of action potentials along the axon via salutary conduction, right? So for CAPE, we don't really have to look at what salutary conduction means per se, but it helps to speed up the reaction. So even though, well, speed up the action potentials, right? The propagation of action potentials, right? So that's what it really helps to do, right? So remember, these are gaps between the myelin insulation of the Schwann cells, right? So it would be like that. So as I said, it facilitates the rapid conduction of electrical signals, right? So that would be that. Now here we're gonna look at the axon terminals down here, right? So the axon terminals. So the axon terminals would be on the opposite side here for a simple motor neuron. So we know that there are different types of neurons, but we generally focus on this one. Right, so these are axon terminals, and we're going to be looking at them when we start talking about the synapse per se. All right, so yeah, so just to review, the soma of the cell, oh well, the soma here is the entire cell body, so that contains all the cellular materials and organelles that we need to care about. The dendrites would be conductors, so they conduct electricity or electrical signals coming from axon terminals of other cells. So if you could think about that, right? So if we speak about the a neuron, like this is, let's say that this is neuron 1 and this is neuron 2, and action potential flows in this direction, right? Then the action potential will actually move from the axon terminal. Let me just write AT, the axon terminal of the primary neuron or first neuron, right? And it will be conducted by the dendrites of the second neuron. So it's something like that. So when the electrical signals leave the action potential, the axon terminal, it will be connected to the dendrites of another neuron, right? Hopefully that makes enough sense, right? So we have that there. So that would generally be it. We're gonna have our axon, and remember our axon are insulated, right, with myelin sheath, which have Schwann cells within them. The myelin sheath helps for the smooth flow, right, of electrical signals, right? As it is an insulator, it keeps the electrical pulse and energy within the axon, right? And the axon have these types of glial cells. The most prolific of them, right, or the most notable of them here would be the Schwann cells, and they help with stuff like maintenance, right? Propagation of other types of peripheral neurons, stuff like that. They really help with propagation and regeneration, right? And then between each of the myelin sheath, the Schwann cells with their myelin sheath, we have the nodes of ranvir, right? So these nodes allow for an increase in speed and propagation of the electrical signal passed into the axon or through the axon, and then those electrical signals will reach axon terminals, where they will now travel from this neuron over a synapse, right, to go to a next neuron. All right, so that there would generally be the structure of the neuron, really explained. Alright, so if there are any issues or concerns about that part, you guys can always leave a comment or something in the chat. Alright, now we are gonna move on to the resting potential. Alright, so since I want these to be short explain videos, right, I'm going to move on to the resting potential in a next clip.